Welcome to the December 2018 edition of the Tier List, brought to you by a+space Games. Lets you know what's going on the ladder, what's popular, what's powerful, and what you should be playing to be moving up that ladder. Before we get into that, though, I do want to remind you that this is brought to you in part by Ink Gaming, a wonderful place to get all sorts of gaming supplies, custom artwork on it. There's lots of wonderful artwork that they have on the site. You can also use the promo code a+space12 to save 12% off your order, and you let them know that we sent you. Check them out, especially for some of your holiday shopping if you have any gamers in your life who want some cool swag. But with that, let's talk a little bit about the ideology and the methodology that we use in this. First off, where do I get my numbers? I first surveyed top players this month. I used Tony G, Wodar, Finkel, Aleito, Ace, and Tobu as my committee that filled out the survey for me of what they thought about the metagame. The one who actually won the $5 Steam gift card this month was Wodar, so congratulations to him. And thank you very much to everybody who helped fill that out. Next, I want to talk about what we do in the actual article. There's a little bit more information in the article that's associated with this. This is linked below. That has suggested decks, more analysis, and more details about the different tiers, etc. So go check all of that out if you want more than what's in this video. But this video is kind of designed for people who want to just get a quick digest of what's going on. And finally, I want to mention that I separate out the power and the popularity of the various decks to help distinguish between what's going on there. I also tell the players to ignore the fun component or the complexity of decks when they're making the rating, just kind of like focusing on absolute power level of a deck in that sense, and then also trying to average out their impression of tournament and ranked play in case there is a difference in people's minds for any given deck, which there are some minor differences, but just average those out in their minds. So with all of that in mind, let's start talking about the power level of what's going on in the ladder. So the Tier 1 decks, those that were rated the highest in terms of power level, were Skycrag Aggro, Fell Midrange, and Haunted Highway. Tier 1.5 was Praxis Tokens, Big Combre Aggro, Ricano Midrange, and FJS Midrange. Tier 2 was Argenport Midrange, Xenon Midrange, Xenon Mask, Praxis Midrange, Ricano Aggro, TJP Control, Stone Scar Aggro. Tier 3 was Feln Berserk / Scream, Stone Scar Grenadins, Canadins, Huru Midrange, TJP Midrange, and Talir Mask. And finally, Tier 4 was Argenport Control, JPS Control, and Allegion Midrange. Few things to note here. The first one, of course, is the ascendancy of Fell Midrange. We actually kind of did identify in the tier list last month that it was pretty powerful, but it's finally broken into that Tier 1 status after having been left off the tier list for such a long time in those sorts of ranges. So well done for those who've been working on the deck, specifically somebody like Tony G, who I know has put a lot of work into the deck. So it's been doing really well, and it's part of the explanation of why I think FJS has fallen off so much. It was a deck that was Tier 1 last month, but the 5-drop big Aegis units that are super scary have really pushed it out of that top tier status. I also want to kind of mention in this tier list, I kind of noticed in the rankings that a lot of the stuff that was in the middle of like the Tier 2 and Tier 3 kind of stuff, it was really similar band of power level, and I honestly couldn't tell you that any one of these decks is any better than any of the others, really. Just looking at the ratings, it's just a kind of a mess in the middle. Like, there are some decks that are really bad, there are some decks that are really good, and there's a bunch of stuff in the middle that's all kind of viable, but nothing that's really shining through as being any more exceptional than anything else. Now let's talk about popularity. What were the most popular decks? So Tier 1, we have Skycrag Aggro and Fell Midrange. Tier 1.5 was Haunted Highway, Combre Aggro, Ricano Midrange, and FJS Midrange. But for Tier 2 to Tier 4, I'm honestly just not going to go through it, because once again, this was a really flat rankings that I got from these guys this time. They just seemed to think that all of these decks were similarly amount of played and just not seeing a lot of play. Those 6 decks that I talked about at the very top there, those are the ones that are making up the predominance of the ladder right now, especially at the top end. So don't need to really worry about any other ones right now as being a particularly large section of the metagame.
So I want to mention again, like Fell Midrange has really stepped up in terms of the popularity. We did see in the previous tier list that it was rated as being relatively powerful, but wasn't popular yet, and that's really changed this month, where the popularity has increased dramatically. So with that, let's move on to talk a little bit about some of the underrated decks. These are decks that their power level was rated that higher than their popularity. There were actually a lot of decks that fit this category to some degree. It seemed as if there like this massive decks in the middle where the players who I interviewed kind of seemed to say, like, yeah, they're all viable to some varying degrees, but nobody's playing them because maybe they're just focused on playing those top tier decks to get quick wins. Like, this is kind of maybe what you see a lot close to the end of a season. People aren't experimenting as much, so they're just kind of focusing on those stock decks, the tier decks, and not as much experimentation. But there were a couple that did stand out as being more underrated than the rest. One of them was actually surprisingly Talir Mask. I think that we've actually seen some interesting evolutions on the ladder. I actually ran into somebody who was playing a Grinva version of the deck with a Justice splash in the deck. I don't remember who it was, unfortunately, because it was a really cool deck, and I should have noted who it was that was playing it. But maybe there's more experimentation here for finding something new. Maybe there's another combo piece that we can find in an upcoming set that will really set this deck off, but it still has some legs to it that maybe it's just not being appreciated since it received such a devastating nerf. So still playable, even though it's greatly diminished in its power level in the eyes of these players. Another deck that was considered underrated was actually Stone Scar Grenadins. This is one that a couple people that I know, like Finkel and Lights Out Ace, have had some amount of success with the deck close to the end of last season. So maybe there is some innovations to be had in this deck set, and especially since we are getting into this new set, and it seems as if numbers matters and go wide matters is a theme in the set. Maybe they'll leave some new tools for this deck to really pop off in the upcoming meta. Finally, let's talk about the overrated decks. These are decks that their power level was less than their popularity. The ones that actually fit this description this month were Skycrag Aggro, Fell Midrange, and Combray Aggro, which all of these decks were actually very close to the top of the standings, and while it might seem like, well, yeah, it's obviously easy for decks that are rated high to be overrated, in this case, it was kind of unusual because I haven't seen it as much in previous months. In this case, I really think that part of this is players saying, I'm going to choose a deck that I know, a deck that is quick and I can get wins with, and I'm going to jam that a lot, and not quite as much experimentation and testing with some of these less popular and slightly less powerful decks. So that might be kind of what you're seeing here, where people are just kind of doing their daily and done kind of runs, and less so of the people who are laddering a lot and experimenting to find different stuff. And that's part of the reason why maybe all of these decks, while they're good, they might still be a bit overrated in terms of how much they're seeing play. That'll do it for today. Thank you so much for joining me for the last tier list of the Fall of Argenport metagame. This is, of course, brought to you by a+space Games. Wonderful place to get all sorts of gaming-related news and information. You can also check out Ink Gaming using the code that I described earlier and the link below to get wonderful gaming swag, especially for the holidays. And you can also join us on all of our social medias. We have a Discord channel that is free and open to everyone to use. There is Twitter, there's Facebook, and then there is, of course, this YouTube channel. And if you like, subscribe, and share, and comment, it actually really helps the channel. So please do that if you can. Thank you so much for your time. Once again, everybody, take care.